Leonard will be here, television watching. Bill Geist goes bird watching. I'll be watching the sports and weather news, but let us get right to the headlines first for Sunday morning, the 21st of May. We have received via a roundabout route the first pictures from China since direct photographic transmissions were cut off by the government on Friday night. They show that the crowds of protesters have not diminished. They show demonstrators bringing army trucks full of soldiers to a halt in the suburbs of Beijing. We have John Sheehan on the line from Beijing now with the latest news. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Charlie. The students tell us they have received from Prime Minister Li Peng a new ultimatum that the troops are going to move on them by 5 a.m. Monday morning, Beijing time. That would be 4 p.m. Eastern time in the United States. There are an estimated 300,000 troops and security forces encircling the city. That we do have reports of some troops in the railway station near Tiananmen Square and possibly in a maze of tunnels that exists underneath the square and links some buildings, including the Forbidden City. Far from the square, the streets are full of people. The people of Beijing have come out of their homes. They gather at the intersections, prepared to form a wall with their bodies to stop any troops that attempt to advance into the city. In Shanghai, hundreds of thousands of people, maybe approaching 1 million, are demonstrating. The U.S. Navy is in Shanghai on a port call. The sailors have not been given normal liberty. They've been taken in buses to organized events. They give some concerts. They play a basketball game with the Chinese. And you know, Charlie, having been here so very recently, you understand that the Chinese are a people of subtle signals. The impression may be completely false, but having the Navy on this continuing cordial visit with the U.S. officers exchanging toasts with the same military establishment that encircles the pro-democracy students in Beijing sends a signal to the Chinese, which they perceive rightly or wrongly as tacit United States approval of martial law and of action against the students.
John Sheehan reporting from Beijing. We'll be talking with John a little later this morning. Everybody knew the Preakness was going to be a two-horse race. What a two-horse race it turned out to be. The two horses were Sunday Silence, winner of the Kentucky Derby on the outside, and Easy Goer, the much-publicized wonder horse on the rail. They thundered down the stretch at Pimlico yesterday, head and head, a Preakness stretch run never to be forgotten.
Back to challenge, heads apart. Easy Goer on the inside with a slight lead. On the outside, Sunday Silence. The rest of them far back. Here's the finish of the Preakness. Sunday Silence and Easy Goer. Photo finish. Noses apart. I can't tell.
What a game, Colt.
At the wire, it was Sunday Silence's nose that turned out to be inches ahead. The horse informally adopted by this program, which believes in a certain amount of silence on Sunday. Our weather map will be boring today to anybody looking for temperature extremes. Very little contrast here. Temperatures in the 80s will dominate from Denver to New York. There will be scattered light showers today across New England. Thunderstorms along Florida's border with Alabama and Georgia. Soaking rains likely where they are much needed in the midsection of the country, centered on Missouri. And tomorrow, beneficial rain should spread across the dry upper Midwest and Great Lakes region with the possibility of some heavy downpours. Cloudbursts across the Tennessee Valley and into the deep south tomorrow. Cloudy with a chance of rain in the northwest tomorrow. So much for weather currents and the maps we use to plot their positions. Let us turn now to currents of thought. Maps exist on which their movements may be followed too. Our milepost this morning concerns one such map of thought. It's a map we've had now in our heads for most of our lives. This is the map I mean. George Orwell wrote this novel of prophecy and warning 40 years ago this year. It is in this chilling book, of course, that we read about Big Brother, the icon-like leader of a totally controlled, totally subdued country whose citizens' very thoughts are monitored, who are gagged and bound and hobbled by unbreakable rules governing language and movement and feeling. This is the modern nightmare. In the world of 1984, it is forbidden to be an individual, forbidden to choose, to think, to behave in any but the dictated way. Westerners have feared, ever since this book was published, that this nightmare might come to pass in the Soviet Union and in China. In those two places, for so long, there seemed to be pictures of Big Brother everywhere, implacably watching, monitoring millions of people, dictating with their stern glances the only possible correct reactions. But look now what changes have begun. Only days ago in Beijing, the leader of the Soviet Union was hailed by demonstrating Chinese as a heroic reformer. He had begun, the student said, to bring to his country what so many Chinese want for theirs, a measure of press freedom, the freedom to argue and wrangle and express opinion openly, the freedom to make choices. This dire prophecy of Orwell's cannot yet be disregarded, but as we shall see in our cover story in a couple of minutes, millions of people are now looking for another way than this way. Last week in China, this map was redrawn.
This portion of Sunday Morning is sponsored by Merrill Lynch, an investment firm built on a tradition of trust.
They do not make lenses wide enough or reporters eloquent enough to describe what happened in China last week. I was there and saw it for myself. It was the greatest public event of my life in its scale, in its emotion, in its potential to change the world. And as I sit here, I know that no words of mine, no pictures I can show you, can possibly convey the experience of watching the people of the most populous nation on the earth suddenly find their voices and demand their freedom. This is a story too big to squeeze onto a television screen. But we're now going to try. This was Beijing's vast Tiananmen Square a few days ago. The Internationale was sung over and over, the international anthem of socialism, meant to emphasize that what was happening here was patriotic. This was for the good of China, the greatness of China. Look at this crowd. It was an enormous crowd. At times, there may have been 1 million people in the square, but that is not what is so very different about this scene. There are things you do not see here. You do not see sticks in the hands of these people, or stones, or ominous bottles with cotton fuses. You do not see helmets or shields. These people meant to change their country and to do it with empty hands. They were armed only with their idealism. They believed they could create freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly in a country where such freedoms never have existed. They believed they could gain freedom simply by wanting it, so visibly and so unanimously that it could not be denied them. This started as a bit of a spring lark for students a few weeks ago. It's become something much deeper and stronger and more important than anyone ever could have imagined, including the leaders of Communist China. Of course, the leaders of Communist China were otherwise occupied just then, meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev. It was that meeting, after all, that drew the world's attention to Beijing in the first place. China's leaders met Gorbachev But China was in the streets, and Gorbachev did not see China. He did not see the crowd that grew impossibly larger hour by hour, workers flooding in from all over the country to declare in great banners that the students were right. And at the center of the square, doctors and nurses watching tenderly over hundreds of young hunger strikers who really meant it when they whispered, "Give me liberty or give me death." The students who started all this now demanded bold, specific things, a meeting between student and Communist Party leaders to be televised live and nationwide. The resignation of Deng Xiaoping. Astonishingly, there were meetings. Students, some of them frail hunger strikers clad in pajamas, faced the despised Premier Li Peng in the Great Hall of the People. Li Peng and the much more popular Zhao Ziyang met with other weakened hunger strikers in the hospital. Li Peng went into Tiananmen Square, into the great multitude there. It appeared that an empty-handed revolution really was being accomplished. By then, ordinary people in dozens of cities were declaring themselves on the side of the demonstrators.
This is, of course, very, very touching. It goes so deep into my heart. China is hopeful. With these students, with these young guys, they're brave, they're courageous, and they are the hope of this country.
It seemed to me as late as Friday, 2 days ago, that the people of China could not possibly be defeated, not by threats, not by clubs, not by armored regiments. The celebration in the streets took on the aspect of a liberation, of a battle that had already been fought and won and was over. But freedom does not come in this world so easily. I stepped aboard an airplane in Beijing 2 days ago, frankly moved and shaken, believing that I had witnessed something like 1776 in China. I flew for a day and landed and heard the news from Beijing and was forced to remember that the embattled farmers of 1776 had muskets in their hands, not banners. The news from China was that martial law had been declared in parts of the capital, that Zhao Ziyang, the conciliatory chief of the Communist Party, who called the action of the students highly commendable and wept at the bedside of a hunger striker, had been forced out of power. Those still in power called for a military crackdown. The crowds in the streets were holding out and growing even larger. Hope was still bright, but the government seemed determined now to switch off the light. In the pre-dawn hours of Saturday, loudspeakers blared into the square an announcement from Premier Li Peng, the apparent winner of a secret power struggle among China's leaders. The announcement said, "Empty the square, disperse, this demonstration is over." There were rumors, troops were being sent, troops were near. In the dark, a policeman with a bullhorn arrived. Was he a lone advance guard? He was not. He had come to say that the Beijing police were on the side of the demonstrators. There were cheers. Then troops did move into the city. Would it end this way? The crowd shouted to the soldiers, "Go back, go back." A woman said to them, "The students are the hope of the country. You must not do anything that will hurt your own people." The first wave of soldiers stopped and turned back. Perhaps this mass of fervent humanity the population of China could not be brought to its knees after all.
China is no longer the same. Just for that, I would speak to the Chinese students in America. You can come back now. Now we have a much better country.
An army commander was said to have refused an order to move his columns into Beijing. The students voted to end the hunger strike, saying they chose to live and continue the struggle. Hope did not die. Hope, unkillable hope. Helicopters appeared overhead. There followed much confusion. Were they a show of sympathy for the movement on the part of the Air Force pilots, or were they a show of force? The police came. They were cowed and humbled by the crowd. Then, for the first time, soldiers appeared with automatic weapons. Would they use those weapons? After all this, after bare-handed victories have been won over automatic weapons, after martial law has been brushed aside, after the heady air of freedom has blown like a hurricane wind through the streets of this and 30 other cities, how will it end? These people who for centuries have not been free to speak, and who then in a single week found their own voices and discovered their own power and spoke in a voice heard around the world, can they be silenced now? The government of China, clearly frightened, decided at the end of the week to try to silence them. And to keep the world from seeing this, the government also decided to silence us.
Carrying out the authority of the Foreign Ministry.
We were ordered off the air.
And if you give the command to my colleague, he will shut us down.
These are the last pictures we saw from China. They were transmitted night before last.
I know not when. This is Dan Rather, CBS News, Beijing.